start with the Quran. So with that, I'd like to invite Brother Khalid to the stage for some recitation, inshallah. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا وقودها الناس والحجارة عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون يا أيها الذين كفروا لا تعتذروا اليوم إنما تجزون ما كنتم تعملون يا أيها الذين آمنوا توبوا إلى الله توبة نصوحا عسى ربكم أن يكفر عنكم سيئاتكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار يوم لا يخزي الله النبي والذين آمنوا معه نورهم يسعى بين أيديهم وبأيمانهم يقولون ربنا أتمم لنا نورنا واغفر لنا إنك على كل شيء قدير صدق الله العظيم.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله.
Assalamu alaikum again. Thank you for coming. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all from the Islamic Society. If you haven't heard much about us before, you may be wondering what we do. As an Islamic Society, we endeavour to put on fun socials for both brothers and sisters, as well as running classes and talks that we hope are informative and insightful, much like tonight's event, inshallah. All of our events are open to everyone, and we always enjoy meeting new faces. So if you're in town and want good company, please do come along. More information can be found at the back where we have our SAM card and details about our website and distribution lists. And so on to tonight's event. We're here to benefit from the Shaykh, inshallah, and also to raise money for those less fortunate around the world. With many thanks to Human Appeal, we have the pleasure of being joined by Shaykh Yasir Qadhi all the way from Memphis, Tennessee. Shaykh Yasir Qadhi studied engineering at the University of Houston, later moving on to become a student at the Islamic University of Madinah, where he obtained a bachelor's in Hadith and a master's in theology. He also has a PhD in Islamic Studies from Yale University and is currently Dean of Academic Affairs at Al-Maghrib Institute. He's one of the few people who has managed to combine a traditional Eastern Islamic education with a Western academic training of the study of Islam. I think it will be of benefit to us all tonight, and so with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Yasir Qadhi to the stage. Assalamu alaikum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. I'd like to begin on somewhat of a personal note. I'm very honored and humbled to be at Oxford, and subhanAllah, 10 years ago, when I finished my graduate studies in Medina, I applied to only 4 or 5 institutions in the world, 4 actually, 3 in America and 1 here in England, and of course it was Oxford. So I applied for my PhD over here at Oxford, and I got accepted to the PhD program, and I was emotionally and psychologically completely prepared to come to Oxford. I had visited your beautiful campus, and I had spoken to the professors and whatnot, and so I was completely prepared. I'm going to be coming here for my PhD, but circumstances got in the way, financial, and the fees and tuition were a little bit too much for me. Whereas in America, I got a scholarship, whereas over here I have to pay them to let me study. And so, but alhamdulillah, I got a scholarship, but not not one that was feasible for me in comparison with the fact that in America you get paid, at least in the institutions that I went to. And so alhamdulillah, in hindsight, alhamdulillah, it was better for me as an American anyway, and there's a difference of educational systems as well. So alhamdulillah, Allah chose what was best for me. But of course I always have an attachment. I was going to go to St. Anthony's College, and everything was all set, but the last minute, literally the last day, I had to decline, and qadar Allah, and alhamdulillah, I'm happy at what happened, but of course because of that, Oxford always has a special place in my heart. In any case, the topic for today is Reconstructing the Muslim Mind, and it is a provocative title, and it is a title that raises eyebrows, especially amongst religious or conservative Muslims, for lack of a better term. And a lot of people say, and I have been emailed and asked this question, and I know there's quite a lot of gossip going around on social media, that what type of lecture is this? Why do we assume that the Muslim mind is in need of reconstruction? Why do we call for reformation? Why should we? And so my talk today will discuss 5 specific issues, one after the other. And inshallah ta'ala, with this we want to begin the dialogue, because this is not a dialogue that can take place in 45 minutes. Rather, this is simply the introduction to the topic. Some points to think about as we pursue a broader conversation with many different segments of society. So the first question that I'll deal with, as I said, there's going to be 5 questions or topics. The first of these questions is there a need for reformation? Is there a need for reconstruction? And especially the religiously minded, or for lack of a better term, and as all of you know, you're all, mashallah, there are many of you are students in the humanities here in Oxford, so you are very familiar with terms being loaded and terms having preconceptions. So when we say conservative, when we say liberal, you know, there is a lot of baggage associated with these terms, but there's also some usefulness to them. So I'll use them, trying to ignore the negative, and just so that we understand what we're talking about. Generally speaking, the mosque-going conservative crowd finds it problematic when we talk about reconstruction or reformation. And they say that in reality, the problems that we face in 2015 are essentially the same problems of 1915 and 1815 and 1715, all the way back to the beginning of Islam. So they say, from their perspective, why the need for reformation when our problems are the same? And they point out, for example, that from the very beginning of Islam, any problem we have today, any problem, you will find the same precedent in early Islam. So for example, let's mention some problems that we have. We have definitely the problem of schisms and sects, groups, theological groups, right? We have plenty of such methodologies and groups. Is this new? Our religion or our conservative-minded crowd will say, of course not. We've had schisms and sects from the very beginning of Islam. We have many groups from the very beginning, from the time of the Sahaba. The first groups broke away, and from that time they have been basically increasing in their quantity. We have now political divisions, and they say, what's new about that? Sure, we might have 60+ nation states, but from the very beginning, our companions went to war with one another over political issues, if you know Islamic history. Right? We actually have had civil war because of politics. And from very early on, we've had multiple caliphates. There were times when there were 3 or 4 de facto caliphates, i.e. people who called themselves caliphs. And then as for the mini semi-independent dynasties, you can count them in the hundreds. They might have given titular service and servitude to the caliphate, but in reality, like the Mughals of India, they might have said the Ottomans are the rulers, but in essence, they really couldn't care less about Ottoman policy. In all practical purposes, they were independent of the Ottomans. So if we look at it in that manner, then the reality is we've always been politically divided after the assassination of Ali ibn Abi Talib. From that time onwards, basically, we've always had political differences as well. If you look at the problems of a social or moral nature, of course, there have always been Muslims that are not, there was no drinking of wine or extramarital, premarital sex. We know in the time of the Sahaba, some of the companions themselves were punished for drinking wine. Is that not the case? Right? From the very earliest, nobody's perfect. Even the companions are not perfect. They fall into issues and sins. So from a moral level, sure, we have a lot of Muslims that are far from their faith. What's new? That also has been around from the very beginning of time. And so this paradigm, the conservative paradigm, by and large, says, and there's an element of truth, why change when the problems that we have now are the same problems of old? We should stick with our tradition. These are also called traditionalists. These are one of the terms given. We should stick with our tradition. We should remain with them. Why? Because the problems are in essence the same. Now, I would argue that while there's an element of truth to the claim that the problems are the same, the reality is that the peculiarities of our circumstances, the specifics of our problems, are actually completely different from the problems faced by earlier Muslims. Where does one begin? How many differences do we have? Perhaps of the most significant challenges and changes for us in 2015 is that everybody sitting in this room has never ever seen or lived under a political caliphate of Islam. And this changes the entire dynamics. The collapse of the caliphate in 1924 was a momentous occasion in a negative sense, meaning that there was some type of state that applied Islam at an international level. Of course, in these days, there is no such legitimate state. There's illegitimate actors like ISIS and others, but the Muslim world, by and large, has rejected them. As for the caliphate, the Muslim world, by and large, accepted it. All of you who study history are very familiar with the Khilafah movements across the globe, especially in India, which eventually led to Pakistan. The Khilafah movement gave them the spirit of having an independent Islamic identity. The collapse of the caliphate was a very traumatic occasion for the ummah of the time, and the fact that we don't have such a caliphate means that we are living for the very first time after 13 centuries of having a political entity that was at least idealistically supposed to implement Islam. We no longer have that. This raises huge questions. How does one apply Islam at the national level when there is no national level that wants to apply Islam? Right? How does one bring about a nation state that is Islamic when, again, the very concept of nation states is new? And this is my second point in terms of changes. We're talking about why are we living in different times here. The second point is the whole phenomenon of nation states. Again, all of us are born into the phenomenon of nation states, and we take it for granted. The ideal of citizenship, the notion of dividing the world into geographic regions called nations or countries, we take it for granted. Very few of us question that reality. But the fact of the matter, as all of us history students and political science students know, this is a relatively recent phenomenon. For the bulk of human history, mankind was not divided into countries and nation states. For the bulk of human history, you gave your loyalties to either your king or queen, and therefore nations, their borders were vacuous. Their borders changed every few years, every war. The borders weren't what mattered. It was your loyalty to a ruling dynasty, right? Or, in other parts of the world, you gave your loyalty to tribes, tribal loyalties, which was, for example, pre-Islamic Arabia, right? The very notion of nation state is relatively modern. I mean, some date it back to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, but I would say, and I'm not an expert, you guys are more experts than I, but my personal opinion, and this is not just my opinion, really the birth of nation states, one could really say, is with the French Republic and the American Revolution. This is really when the king is taken away and the republic, or the nation state basically, becomes the ideal. Now, there are those political philosophers, not Muslims, just political philosophers, that have argued that the very notion of nation states is really imaginary. These borders are figments of our imagination, collective imagination. The collective history of a people is something that borders on hagiography. It's more mythology than actual fact. And there is really nothing in common about the citizens of one nation that separates them and distinguishes them from citizens of another nation. Now, you guys talk about British values, we talk about American values, Canadians talk about Canadian values, but when you look at it, all of these values are pretty much similar. Not just that, I mean, look, the question to you basically is very simple. What is it that makes all of you British? What is the one identifying characteristic that makes all of you British? Rather than, for those of you that are British obviously, rather than, because I see some of you like, I'm not British. Okay, well those of you that are British, they're carrying the British citizenship, UK citizenship, right? What is the one defining characteristic that unites all of you together? Think about it. The only thing that unites all of you together is the color of your passport, which is a circular definition. You're British because you're British. Whereas, if you were to look at people through the lens of loyalty to dynasties, you can clearly, you ally yourselves with dynasties. Loyalty to tribes, you clearly have loyalty to religion, ethical values, morality. You can identify. But nation states are figments of imagination. There's this mythology put together. This never existed in human history up until very recently, relatively just 150, 200 years ago, which is literally the twinkling of an eye in the history of the world. So the point is that we are now living in a new world where groups of individuals are divided based upon the fortuitous circumstance of where their mothers gave birth to them. I am an American, not by choice per se, not that I'm complaining or angry, but the reality is, why am I an American? It just so happened my mother was in America when she gave birth to me. Whereas, for example, one could argue the religious loyalty is a decision. You make it. You're free to choose. And so you become a part of the ummah, because of course the Islamic polity is not based on nation states. It's based on your choice. If you want to become a member of the ummah, tafaddal, bismillah, come, you're a member of the ummah. If you choose not to, well then that's your business and your loss. Okay? So the point is that how you divide the world is relatively new. And in particular, in 2015, the map that we have of the world is less than a century old. It's less than a century old. Most of the countries that we now look at and whatnot are basically post-World War I. Some of them, post-World War II. I mean, some borders of the Middle East were defined in the 70s. Kuwait, for example, 1972 or 73. I mean, it's just very, very recent, these borders of nation states. So, your government, for example, has a lot of talk now of British values. And we have to exemplify British values. Okay, pause here, ask them, what do you mean by British values? And every single adjective they will use is an adjective that every single civilization in the world will presume that it too is implementing. Even if you don't agree with their implementation, but from their perspective, they are implementing it. So British value is, let's say, freedom or honesty or hard work. Is there any civilization that says, no, we don't want freedom, we want servitude? Is there any civilization that says, no, we don't want, we're intolerant? Now, you might think they're intolerant, and maybe they are more intolerant than the British, but from their perspective, would they say, no, our value is intolerance? Would they say that? Wallahi, the most intolerant regime would say, no, we are tolerant, right? So it all goes back to really just good words that sound nice and big and fat, but have no tangible reality, right? And so this is a new novelty that will cause us to pause. The novelty of citizenship, the novelty of modern democracies even, another novelty. Not just citizenship, but system of government. This is again new, where theoretically at least, changing public policies, changing public opinion is possible by a group of citizens. This is what is supposed to happen theoretically in a liberal democracy. Now, this is again new. For most of human history, the world has been ruled by monarchies. It's quite literally either one person or a very small group of extremely influential, wealthy people, whatnot. Well, one could argue that's still the case now, but let's not go down the conspiracy line theory here. But for most of human history, this is how civilizations rule themselves, right? Technically, theoretically, let's forget about how real that is. Theoretically, that should not be the case in liberal democracies. In liberal democracies, citizens have the power to influence their government. This is also novel. This is also new. This did not exist once upon a time. And this is completely unprecedented. And by the way, now one could be skeptical and say, this is all a sham. Populations cannot change their governments. And they might point out to some realities. For example, the Iraq War, where demonstrations were seen here in your country that really were unprecedented in the history of this nation. Demonstrations against government policy. And those demonstrations were completely meaningless, right? One could be cynical and argue that, this doesn't really exist. But on the flip side of the coin, there are plenty of evidences, plenty of examples that clearly demonstrate that yes, at times, policies can change if pressure is put by the people. And I guess the classic example for us in our time is the example of America and the Civil Rights Movement. That the Civil Rights Movement is something that is relatively recent. In fact, many of us in this room are old enough to remember it. Not me, but many of us in this room are. My father came to America in 1963. He landed in Houston, Texas in 1963. Texas, you know Texas. You know Texas. Okay. He tells me that he saw and had to obey the signs that said, whites this way, blacks that way. Now my father's my skin color, but that didn't matter that he's in between, right? You cannot take 1 + 1 divided by 2 over here. No, you have to it doesn't matter. He's considered to be of the, because of his brown skin color. So my father, we're not talking about generations ago. When he comes to Texas, he has to sit in the back of the bus. He has to obey the laws, the water fountain here, the restrooms there. This is not eons ago. This is my own father telling me this, right? Now, the Civil Rights Movement, do you think that was popular amongst the elite? Do you think the government wanted to change the laws for the African Americans who at that time were probably 20% of America? Do you think that was something the elites wanted? Obviously not. They liked status quo. But what happened? Quite clearly, shifting public opinion. It was a long and arduous task, and one can correctly argue that it's not fully over yet. But at least, let's be honest, I'm from America. You can't be overtly racist. You cannot have signs that say, whites here, blacks there. You cannot legally, publicly discriminate. Sure, behind the scenes talk takes place. Sure, cops and Ferguson, all of this is, yes, remnant. But compared to what it was 1 generation ago, there has been amazing progress. And this shows what? And I will argue, and this is my argument, that let us not be so infantile. Let's not be so facetious here. Just because we're worried about going 20 degrees doesn't mean we stop going 3, 4, 5 degrees. Just because we're worried about what potentially might happen doesn't mean we stay where we are. We're going to have a frank dialogue, an open conversation, and argue out what areas of Islam can be reformed and what areas cannot. What areas of Islam need some fine-tuning and what areas are absolutes. That is an ongoing conversation between specialists. And now is not the time in front of this audience to go into more detail, but I just want to make the caveat before moving on to the second point. Remember, I have 5 points, and this was the longest one, so don't worry. The next one will be faster. I had 5 points. The first one was, do we need reform? Do we need reconstruction? My argument is a resounding, yes, we do, but with proper methodology. With proper methodology. We're not just opening the doors and saying, no holes barred, let's rethink through the whole Quran and Sunnah. No. I don't think that's going to be successful, and I don't think that is legitimate. In the end of the day, we as believing Muslims believe that our God gave us a guidance, and that guidance is meant to be applied. I am asking us to question the humanly derived tradition and not the texts themselves, but the interpretation of the texts. I am not asking us to question the Quran. I am a believing Muslim in the end of the day. And I will have a red line. And I know some Muslims don't have that red line, and I know obviously people who don't believe in Islam don't have that red line. That's fine for them. That's fine for them. For me, as a believing Muslim, I have to have a red line. And that red line is, I believe the Quran is from my Lord, my Creator. And I believe He sent me a prophet. Okay, after that, let us now see every verse, every hadith, how did people interpret it? Let's look at human interpretation. And we are allowed to question human interpretations. We are allowed to question what legal scholars have derived in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th century. We're allowed to question them. And we're allowed to take into account that all of the great imams wrote according to the social and political milieu they found themselves in. So why can't we also go back to those sacred texts and write according to the social and political milieu we find ourselves in? Now, the technicalities of this, we leave to qualified jurists. That's understood. Lay people don't get involved in these discussions because just like lay people don't get involved in discussions of things outside their specialty. I am not a medical doctor, and it is not my duty to go and question medical doctors' practices, but those who are qualified, those that have studied, have every right amongst themselves to question procedures, think of new ones. So yes, qualified and trained jurists with an open mind should question, should challenge. And these challenges should be done with the proper methodology. But I believe traditionalism, i.e. cutting and pasting fatwa and medieval textbooks, I believe this needs to stop. I believe this is harmful to the ummah. I believe it will be one of our biggest impediments to flourish. We respect the tradition, we take it as precedent, but the tradition is not sacred. The tradition itself is not sacred. The tradition is great. It is the product of great minds. But at the end of the day, those minds were human, and they themselves were products of their civilizations. Okay? So that is the first point, and I very much argue we need to rethink, we need to reform, but with the proper methodology, with red lines. I am not saying that we reject the Quran, we reject the Sunnah. I am not of that. There are people who say that. I am not of that. And I think that that's not going to be successful. The second point is that as we talk about these issues, we need to differentiate between slogans and solutions. This is my second point. And inshallah, I'm speaking to a very intelligent audience at Oxford University. You have no problems with this issue. Separating slogans from solutions. Unfortunately, many Muslims, the masses, they love slogans and they substitute slogans for solutions. All too often, people, clerics, others start trumpeting slogans and the masses accept them as solutions. Slogans help politicians win office. It doesn't help solve communal problems. Slogans appeal to emotions, but they're useless in providing solutions. Slogans sound great, they accomplish little, if anything. And don't get me wrong, there's a need for slogans and that's why they're used. My point is though not to confuse the slogan for the solution. For example, slogans are very common, we hear them all the time. Islam has the answer, or Islam is the answer. Now, this is a slogan. We need to return to Islam. Islam is the solution. Well, what's the question? If Islam is the answer, what is the question for this answer, right? And what do you mean Islam is the answer? Or many conservative Muslims will say, and I mean there's a truth, there's a legitimacy here, we must return to the Quran and Sunnah. Well, okay, I agree with you, I actually agree with you. But what does that mean? How are we going to return to the Quran and Sunnah? Who is going to decide what interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah? And there's a very famous story. One of the first groups to use slogans was the group known as the Khawarij. The Khawarij were the first fanatical group of Islam, and their intellectual descendants today are ISIS and their ilk, right? These are the fanatics of Islam. The Khawarij were the first group to use slogans. And by the way, it's not a coincidence that ISIS uses slogans all the time, right? It's the part of their slogans are very facile, very, very superficial. They don't really solve. They sound good, they appeal to your emotions, but they don't actually solve problems. The first group to use slogans was the early Khawarij. They were fighting Ali ibn Abi Talib. Great, Khulafa al-Rashidun, the companion, the cousin of the Prophet. They were fighting Ali. And they're using a slogan to fight Ali. What was their slogan? Who can tell me, by the way? Where are the students of Islamic history? La hukma illallah. Al-hakimiyya lillah, basically, right? By the way, this is exactly what we find in some modern groups as well, hakimiyya and whatnot. And that's being a bit simplistic, I know, but the first people to really emphasize this were the Khawarij. So the Khawarij said, we want Allah to judge. We want the Quran to be our judge. The Quran is going to be our hukum. Our judgment is for the Quran. So they're opposing Ali and they're saying, come with us, we will use the Quran as our judge. So it is said in our history books, Ibn Kathir mentions this and others, that one day Ali managed to get an appointment with some of these leaders, call them to his majlis, his diwan, and to debate with them. And he called them to his majlis and he called for a copy of the Quran to be brought in. Now in those days, The Quran was not a small booklet on paper, nor on your iPhone and iPad on this, iQuran or something, In those days, the Quran, the Mus'haf, was a massive tome. Why? Who can tell me why?
The sheets and on the barks of the trees,
the skins of animals. Imagine writing the Quran on camel skin. Imagine. There was no paper, right? Paper was discovered by the Muslims in I have a whole lecture on this, by the way. Look it up online. It's called The History of the Printing Press and Paper in the Muslim World. And I document the rise and fall of the Ummah by two examples. When the early Muslims discovered paper in the Battle of Tal'as, the Abbasids jumped on it and they developed it and they spread it around the world. And paper was manufactured by Muslims and imported to Europe. And for 400, 500 years, which not coincidentally, this is the whole tangent by the way, nothing related to my lecture. Not coincidentally, the rise of the Muslim world saw the rise of paper, right? And then slowly but surely Europe began to overtake the Muslim world, and Europe invented the printing press. Okay, Gutenberg invented the printing press, right? And this shows you the different dynamics. Once upon a time, paper is being sent to Italy, and slowly but surely, now Italy sends paper to the Muslim world. And the printing press is now banned by the Muslims for 300 years. And Europe continues. When Newton is printing his on the Scientific Inquiry, whatever is that, the famous book of Newton, wasn't he here, right? Oh, the other. I am very familiar with the Yale and other university as well. We don't mention the other university. We also have another university we don't mention by name. Okay, so I'm very familiar with the other university phenomenon. Okay, I apologize. I did a faux pas there by mentioning somebody of that university. But my point being that the Muslim world banned the printing press, and this is not a coincidence that it signaled the beginning of the end. Back to my topic here, that I was saying that Ali radiallahu anhu called for a copy of the Quran, and a copy of the Quran was quite literally was brought in by 10 men or something. It's maybe 4 feet by 7 feet by 4 feet high. I mean, the mushafs were massive back then. There was one mushaf in every city, and you would just copy your surahs or something that you wanted and then take it home. People didn't have the full mushaf at home. It was too big to. Paper, of course, changed all of that. So Ali called for the big mushaf to be brought in, and they're the Khawarij. What was their logo? What was their motto? What was their slogan? The Quran will judge. And so Ali said in front of them, "O Quran, judge." Silence. "O Quran, judge." Silence. He kept on asking the Quran to judge until the Khawarij said, "O Ali, the Quran is not going to speak to you." So he said, basically, "Fools, what do you think then when you say you want the Quran to judge? Who else will judge other than the men who read the Quran and extract judgment from it?" Which is basically what he's doing. Right? So he's basically telling them these slogans, you need to move beyond them. And inshallah, I think all of you understand that there has to be more than just slogans. We need to go back to the Salaf. We need to go back to the early times. We need to go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Well, there's an element of truth, but what does that mean? You need to move beyond that, and therefore, don't let a slogan trump, basically, an idea. The third point I want to mention is that I quote a phrase from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which means, give everyone the right that is due to them. Give everyone the right that is due to that person. This is a phrase of famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Give everybody the right that is due to that, to him or her. Now, what do I mean by this? This is a very controversial point for some, and it's a very simple and logical, and it's a well-known principle for others. My point here is that we need to understand our ummah is composed not just of ulama, of scholars trained in the tradition, but also specialists who have nothing to do with Islamic knowledge. Lawyers, engineers, doctors, activists, politicians, media specialists. And the solutions to our problems requires cooperation between these various specialities. In my humble opinion, and I speak as somebody who's trained in the tradition, who has studied at one of the most conservative, ultra-conservative, prestigious seminaries in the Muslim world, as you know, the University of Medina. For 10 years I was there, and who has great sympathy for our ulama, and is considered to be of that camp by many of the Muslim world. So I'm not dismissing ulama, but I'm saying conservative Muslims raise their ulama above the level that they deserve. And this leads to many problems. Practicing Muslims who love Islam, great for them, consider ulama to be the ultimate reference for every issue the ummah faces. Do you understand what I'm saying here? And this is a problem. Now we have the flip side as well, and that is that others dismiss the ulama completely and say, who cares what these Maulvis and Imams and Maulanas want to say? They have no relevance to us. Okay? So we have both extremes. And I am arguing for a healthy dialogue. I mean, Tariq Ramadan is also arguing in the same way. And he argues for scholars of the text and scholars for the context. That's basically pretty much what I'm also saying in my own manner. Scholars, ulama, are great for what they're needed. For classical fiqh issues, for theology, for the tafsir tradition. But by and large, ulama are not trained to deal with modern issues and problems. And I will tell you, as somebody who trained as an alim in Medina, when you come back, when I came back to your communities, to your peoples, wallahi, the bulk of questions I get asked, I have not been trained for them. The simple example is family issues, marital problems, teenage depression, suicide. Do you think that Al-Azhar or Medina or Islamabad or Malaysia trains you in pastoral care, in counseling, in psychology? No. It taught me about the rules of nikah and the rules of divorce. It does not teach you how to reconcile between husband and wife that are having marital problems. It doesn't teach you how to, counsel a teenager that's going through depression. But the shaykh is assumed he knows best. He's a shaykh, isn't he? I mean, wallah, I'm not making this up. One day somebody came to me. This really shows you, and mashallah, good Muslim, mashallah, big beard, if you will, that's a sign of Islam. But I mean, a practicing Muslim, mashallah. He comes up to me, I'm not making this, he goes, Shaykh, he pulled out a piece of paper and said, Shaykh, which stock should I invest in? This or that? And my jaw just dropped. Like, are you serious? Like, because you respect me for my seerah and my tafsir and my, qira'ah or whatever, you actually think I am qualified to tell you which stock. He's not asking haram and halal, he's asking like which stock in terms of, profit. You know what? I have no interest in economics, man. I have nothing to do with finance. I studied engineering, I like chemistry, a little bit of organic is fine, but I hated finance. I have nothing, with all respect to the PhD in finance back then, I have no concern with it. It's not my passion. But he thinks just because I'm a sheikh, just because I'm an alim, I must know which stock is better than that. This, wallahi, it's a problem. It's a problem of conservative Muslims that they raise their ulama above the level. And it's a problem of liberal Muslims, for lack of a better term, that they dismiss ulama altogether. Both sides have a problem. And what needs to happen is a dialogue. What needs to happen is a cooperation between the two. We need to put our scholars in their proper place. Right? And unfortunately, all too often, even many of our scholars, because in the end of the day, scholars are human, they put themselves in a place they don't deserve. And this is the fault of them and the fault of the public. It's the fault of the public because, guess what, guys? Suppose, may Allah protect me and you, suppose I was of an evil mind. And suppose I wanted to take advantage of innocent people. Okay, somebody asked me about the stock market, I say this one. I just say it. Then lo and behold, he gets some profit. He'll go tell his friend, oh, the sheikh knows this. Then more and more people come. And all of a sudden, I'm the stock expert. Now, you laugh at this, right? Can't you understand when you ask a sheikh about a political issue, it's the exact same thing? It's the exact same thing. You laugh at the stock issue because every one of you understands how ridiculous it is. Why can't the Muslim Ummah understand that the majority of scholars are not trained to analyze political trends? They're not trained to talk about, should you vote for the conservatives or the Lib Dems or the, whatever. It's not their forte. It's not disrespectful for them. You're the ones at fault when you ask them.
You're the ones who are dragging them into a speciality and an arena that is not theirs. And unfortunately, some scholars are human. Maybe they might not even be evil. But when 20 people ask them and they see their influence, so they think, okay, maybe I have some knowledge of politics. In the end of the day, all of us think we're politically savvy, right? When it comes to politics, we read what is it, the Independent or the Times? I hope not the Sun. But you read something, and then you're like, khalas, I know my politics, right? Many people read the Sun and they think they know politics, right? Point being that, yes, it is possible the Imam, the Shaykh, will start presuming that my opinion is worth something. And the public believes that my opinion about politics is somehow holier than his opinion. It's a two-way street. Now we have a problem. You guys have a problem in England. Your minister, Theresa May, is going to pass a law that will in essence criminalize many things that are right now legal, or at least problematize them, right? And I'm not joking with you. You guys should be aware of what's going on in your own country, where teachers are going to be told to monitor students and their questions, where the library books you check out might be, might send alarm bells, right? Where if you say something about the British government, somebody might be knocking on your door. These are laws that are going to happen if this bill passes, right? The anti-terrorism bill that they're going to pass is called.
Yeah, they're against it.
Many are against it. Many are against it, but obviously many are for it, right? Now, how are you going to campaign against this? Do you think ulama are your primary reference? Do you think your mashayikh and scholars are the people you need to go to? No, you wouldn't go to your ulama to build a building, to design a building, to wire up to. You wouldn't go to your ulama to be medical advice. So why do you think your ulama, if you're conservative, why do you think your ulama are also the best reference about how to fight this bill, how to fight Islamophobia? But the flip side also applies, by the way, and that is if you're on the liberal side of the spectrum, where ulama are completely dismissed. That's also a mistake. Why? Because there are red lines you're not supposed to cross. And those ulama will tell you, well, if you do this, make sure you don't cross this line. Make sure you're not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that. You need to run things by the more open-minded ulama. So there's got to be a cooperation between specialists of the tradition, ulama, and specialists of whatever else you're doing in media, in campaign, in finance, whatever it is. There has to be a healthy cooperation and put together. Each side brings its resources in. And as I said, this is a two-way street. And one final caveat here before I move on to my final 2 points about this issue is that one of our biggest problems, my dear brothers and sisters, one of our biggest problems is that we do have this major divide between the intelligentsia, the liberal elite, and between the bulk, the mainstream, that are relatively conservative and not as intelligent, not as socioeconomically, if you like, wealthy or whatnot. The fact of the matter, and I'm tired of pussyfooting and beating around the bush, I call a spade, and I speak very frankly. We don't have the luxury of not speaking frankly anymore. Frankly, we are in a very dire situation across the globe, wherever we look. It's pretty grim. Really. And there's no time for playing games here. Fact of the matter is, we have a huge divide between a group of Muslims that are, generally speaking, socioeconomically well-connected, well-off, elite. Generally speaking, they're very liberal in their values, very disconnected from the mainstream, very dismissive of scholarship. And the mainstream Muslim world, or the bulk of the masses if you like, who are very conservative. They consider their ulama to be the greatest people and frames of reference. This dichotomy has many reasons for it. One of them is, let me be as blunt as possible, our own philosophy of Islam and Islamic scholarship. Look at the Muslim world. Look at and I know this is going to cause some controversy, but again, we don't have the luxury of ignoring this. Look at the Muslim world today. Muslim majority lands, where there are ulama that go and train in the tradition. Who goes to those schools? Who goes to those schools to become imams and maulanas and imams and scholars and faqirs and whatnot? Is it the elite of society? Is it those who have been trained in the best high schools with the best education? Or is it the exact opposite? In many Muslim countries, and I'm not going to mention names to offend people because all Muslim countries are guilty, but there are countries that are, their education is nationalized and the government decides where you go. If you get above, I'm not making this up, this is an actual example. If you get above a 90, you can go to any school, especially medical school. If you get above an 80, they'll send you into accounting or engineering or something like that. If you get above a 70, other schools. If you fail, the only option you have is what? The Islamic seminary. The Islamic seminary. You don't need any passing grade to go there. And of course there are exceptions, but realistically, the majority of people, I mean, ask you that are from other countries, you're sitting at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. You have all studied in very good universities or high schools before you came here. Simple question. Did any of your friends go into Islamic seminaries from that university or high school? Did any of your friends become an alim from those elite liberal arts colleges, from those grammar schools, or did they all want to go to America and England and France and Canada? So who ends up becoming an imam? It's people that have never been exposed to the modern world. It's people that are undereducated. It's people that are socioeconomically at a different level. So what do you expect from their fatwa, except that they're going to preach things that are completely disconnected from reality? Frankly, we are also to blame. Because once upon a time, and I'm not being romantically ideal, this is really the way it was. The best and brightest minds were sent to the Islamic seminaries. Once upon a time, you had to be the best student to get into the Islamic seminaries. Unfortunately, it is the exact opposite now. So no surprise that the liberal, intelligent elite scoff at the fatwa that come from the Middle East and India and Pakistan. They make fun of it because some of those fatwa are worthy to be made fun of. How could our ulama be so disconnected? How could they be so backward? How could they be so sectarian? Well, guess what, guys? Because you didn't send your best and brightest into those schools. You sent your most undereducated, your most deprived. You sent your a totally different level. What did you expect is going to come out? And you yourself, who are so highly educated, decided you have nothing to do with Islamic scholarship. And that is why, and I speak as somebody, again, I've seen both sides. Guys, I have a chemical engineering degree, PhD from Yale, 10 years in the most ultra-conservative seminary in the Muslim world. I've seen both sides. And so when I speak to your crowds, I'm critical of them. When I speak to their crowds, I'm critical of this. So don't worry, I criticize both sides because both are at fault here. But I'm saying we need to rethink through Islamic academics. And if we send our best and brightest minds, that's really going to change the dynamics. Until that happens, we definitely need dialogue between scholars of our tradition and specialists in every field, and our liberal elite have much to offer the ummah, and our conservative ulama and mawlanas also have much to offer the ummah. The two of them need to learn to collaborate and cooperate. The two of them need to come to the table and swallow their pride on each side and understand genuinely, you have something I don't have, I have something you don't have. Let's work together. Let's battle these anti-terrorism bills. Let's change the Islamophobic media. Let's cause an impact in society. Let's see what we can do to bring about a better society. And I think this is a very essential, necessary point if we want to move the dialogue forward. The fourth point, and this is short and the fifth one is even shorter. The fourth point is that I think in light of modernity, we need to rethink through classical sectarianism. We need to rethink through classical sectarianism. One of our problems is that every movement and every tradition and every madrasa defines itself by negating the other movements. And at some base level, this is purely understandable, right? You guys right now, it's a healthy competition, but you don't mention the other university. You make fun of them, you diss them. At my university, Yale, we would wear shirts that says, you know, Harvard does this, Harvard does that. Very vulgar sometimes, okay? We'd always diss them. That's a healthy, it's nothing, but it could get, at times, especially when religion is involved, it could get more than just a healthy joke, right? And with religion, it does become more than a healthy joke. It becomes an evil, pernicious, actually looking down at the other, maybe even physical violence. We need to understand there's a psychological reason why every system wants to negate the other systems. Why the Salafis diss on the Deobandis hit the Barelvis look down at everybody else. So there's a reason. Because in the end of the day, you want your product to sell. And Coke will only flourish if Pepsi does not flourish. You need to denigrate the other, especially when you're running your own shop. You're selling your own product. And at some level it's understandable. I'm not justifying. I'm saying it's a reality. Got to work with the system. We need to understand that the people that come out of these madrasas and these institutions, and I'm an example of that. For 10 years I was in this institution, and it is teaching me to think in a certain manner and to view other Muslims in another manner. They have to, because that is their brand. And they want me to be a member of their brand. And other institutions are doing the same with their students. So when we have a graduate of Darul Uloom, and a graduate of Al-Azhar, and a graduate of Madinah, and a graduate of any other institution, they have all been taught that their greatest enemy is whom? The other institutions. And they don't realize that in the end of the day, what combines all of these strands is much more than what divides them. Especially in light of modern circumstances. Especially in light of your circumstances in England or mine in America. And the fact of the matter is, if each firqa and sect and schism stopped teaching its doctrines to its students, the broader public would simply ignore those differences in doctrines and move on. The only people that are interested in debating these mundane or theological issues are people that have been taught their respective baggages by their respective institutions. Think about it. And modern scenarios and modern questions are simply not taught. I get asked questions that Medina did not train me for. One of the major problems that we have is the rise of agnosticism amongst our youth. I say this is a problem of cataclysmic proportion. I am genuinely worried as a cleric. I speak as a cleric now, a sheikh. I am genuinely worried, as every single religious pastor and rabbi is worried. We have a serious problem. Who cares about sectarian differences between the Sufis and the Salafis, between the Deobandis and the Hanafis? Who cares about these issues? These are not issues that are being one another, and I'm not saying you have to agree with the differences, but we have to tolerate them. We have to tolerate them and learn to dialogue and cooperate, listen to me carefully now, on issues that the both of us have the same wavelength on. Now, in the end of the day, and I'm not a utopic idealist, and I am in the end of the day a Sunni. I'm a Sunni theologian. My speciality is Aqidah. That's what I've studied and trained for. In Medina, my master's is in Aqidah. I understand these theological differences are huge. And we would feel uncomfortable, many of us on both sides of the spectrum, combining our mosques into one, let's say. And historically, our mosques have not been one. We've had separate mosques. I am saying, on a pragmatic, practical level, let there be two mosques, no problem. But let's also come together for Islamic Awareness Week, maybe. Let's come together to battle Islamophobia. Let's come together to fight legislation that we disagree with. Let's learn to cooperate in some areas, even as we agree not to cooperate in other areas. There has to be a level of maturity now. Who cares what his opinion is when I need him to fight against these anti-terrorism bills? Who cares I'm not asking him to preach theology to my masjid. I'm not asking him to come and lead the prayer in my masjid. I understand that, okay, he's not the best qualified, my community, and I am not willing to listen to that type of theology, fine. But does that mean that I cannot invite him to engage in a debate with an Islamophobe? Right? There are people in your community, I'm not going to mention names, not to get political or whatnot. There are people in your community, quite literally, that might not be of the Sunni persuasion. But they are extremely eloquent, good at debate. They might even have debated at your own union over here. And they seem to do an amazing job. An amazing job. on live TV, debating your politicians, debating your Islamophobes, humiliating those who mock Islam and whatnot. Literally wipe the floor with them. But they might not be, they were born into a non-Sunni family. So of course, he's going to be of that persuasion. Can I not be mature enough to see, here is a man who wants to defend our values. Here is a man who wants to defend the freedom of Muslims to be Muslims. Yes, I disagree with this man about his beliefs about the companions. I'll be the first to say this. I disagree, and I don't like what his opinion is. I don't like it. But in the end of the day, can I use him? And can I cooperate with him? And can I befriend him on a platform against Islamophobia? Yes, wallahi, I can and I will. And by the way, I have a good relationship with this particular hypothetical individual. So, now, would I invite him to give the khutbah? Suppose he were religiously qualified. He's not. Suppose he were. Would I invite him to give the khutbah in my masjid? Personally, I'll be honest with you, no, I wouldn't. Because here's my point. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a realist. I'm not talking for some utopic, la-di-da or kumbaya. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We have significant differences, but let's stop the hatred. Let's agree to disagree. Okay, you know what? I disagree with you. I don't like this opinion, but I see you're a good person who wants to defend my values as a Muslim. And that's my point. Rethink through sectarian lines. We have a whole different paradigm. We have a whole different issue. So I strongly believe if we want to move the ummah forward, we need to have a healthy dialogue. Not a utopic. That's what I'm saying. I'm not calling for a singing hands together. That's not going to happen. But a realistic, pragmatic understanding that in order to move the ummah forward, we need to get the help of everybody that we can. And the final point, which is a very simple one, inshallah, and then I'm done from my side. The final point is that when it comes to modernity's issues, when it comes to battling Islamophobia, when it comes to this counterterrorism bill and how you're going to oppose it, when it comes to really the bulk of issues that we're dealing with in our times, typically there is no one right answer. And it is healthy for the ummah to have multiple answers. So let one group proceed on path X, and another group proceed on path Y, and a third group proceed on path Z. And you find the path you like the best. And instead of making your whole life criticizing other paths, either join a path or create your own path. Concentrate on building and not destroying. It takes 0 qualifications to be an armchair critic. The example of the armchair critic is like the guy who's watching the football match, right? And his player doesn't do what he wants, and he jumps up, oh, even I could have scored the goal, as his belly is jiggling up and down and whatnot, It's like, everybody can be that man. It requires 0 qualifications. Don't destroy the efforts of others as long as it is within the permissibility of the Sharia. Okay? And you might be passionate about your vision and your methodology. Good for you. You might strongly disagree with other methodologies. Good for you. Be a part of your methodology. Be a part of your particular path. But realize that as long as it is acceptable in Islam, and that's the key point, we're not saying do something haram, clearly that's not allowed. So let me give you a simple example, okay? So your main parties in England are the Conservative, the Lib Dems, the Labour, these are your 3 main ones, right? Now, let me ask you a frank question. Do you think it is wise that all Muslims join only one of these parties and support them? Think broadly. Do you think it is wise that we put all of our eggs in one basket? Tell me. No, it's not. It's not wise. Because if you put your eggs in the wrong basket and the other party comes to power, you're in big trouble. It is healthy for Muslims to be a part of the Conservative, and others to be a part of Labour, and others to be a part of Lib Dem, and others to be independent. It's healthy. We want Muslims to be across the spheres of life. We want Muslims to show their presence everywhere. Now, yes, we're going to draw some lines. So if there's a bigoted racist party whose very existence is premised upon kicking Muslims out of Europe and whatnot, theoretical, hypothetical, of course, because obviously England and British values would not allow those parties to exist, of course. But suppose there was such a party theoretically, and a Muslim was campaigning and financing it, we would tell him, are you stupid or what? Right? So within a level of respectability, a spectrum of toleration needs to to be inculcated within us. You see what I'm saying here, right? You might be passionate. No, labor is the way to go. Conservative way to go. Live there. Fine, good for you. Be a part of that. But realize it is healthy for others to disagree with you. Don't just tolerate it. Appreciate diversity. Appreciate it, as we said, with the caveat that it is an acceptable difference of opinion. Who gets to decide acceptability is another topic altogether, but I gave you an example that's pretty clear-cut. I mean, we don't want Muslims to join a racist party and give them billions of dollars. That is utterly ludicrous. But we do want them to join all of the mainstream parties, and the same applies for other issues as well. How best to battle any issue. Some will say, let's go out on the street and protest. Others are going to say, no, for this issue, protests are going to not look very good. Let's write letters to our politicians. Fine. Let there be some people who do this, some people who do that, and realize that it is possible, and in fact this is the general rule, that each of these endeavors has pros and cons, and the pros of each of them, for the people that do them, outweigh the cons. And in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge us based upon our sincerity and our niyyah. And we thank Allah, we thank our God, that He will judge us not based upon our results, but based upon our effort and sincerity. It's the only judge, our Lord, who will judge you not based upon your results, but upon your efforts. No other examiner, no other teacher, no other boss for your entire worldly life will judge you based on your sincerity and your effort. They want to see in your final exam, did you get the right answer or not? They don't care how much you studied. It's irrelevant to them. How sincere you attended, that's irrelevant to them. They want to see the final answer right there. Is it right or wrong? Only our Lord cares about your sincerity and effort and doesn't care about the actual result. Suppose you didn't, Palestine. How do we go about bringing Palestinian rights? Maybe I'm not going to be successful. Maybe I'm not going to change. But I tried. Public awareness, talking, whatnot. And alhamdulillah, my Lord will see that in me. And He will judge me because I tried and I was sincere. Even if Palestine was not freed. Even if the Palestinian people, their situation did not change. Allah will reward me and you based upon intention and effort. And not based upon actual result. So the fifth and final point is that appreciate this diversity, understand that there is good in pretty much everything that is done with the right intention, and these issues don't have a clear right and wrong answer. These issues of modernity and how we deal with them don't have a clear-cut right and wrong answer, and inshallah ta'ala there's good in all of these as long as Islamic law allows for that spectrum. These are the 5 points I wanted to share with you just to begin the dialogue, just to rethink our paradigm. And of course this is an ongoing conversation, not just between us here, but really between the entire Muslim world, and we need to have scholars and activists and political theorists and ulama and people of all backgrounds involved and engaged, and we need the public as well to be intellectually aware and even to participate where it is appropriate for them to participate. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all with sincerity and with good action. May He accept our deeds and overlook our mistakes. Jazakumullahu khairan. And with that I hand the floor to...
Very inspiring talk as always. Thank you very much. This is a point about reformation, the second point to us. Do you not see a danger in that the ulama of the East, they operate from their own environments, they're operating as Muslims from within Muslim societies, that we in the West would be disowned if we start jettisoning certain aspects, traditions, and so on. So there's going to be a split. That's the first point. The second is that here in the West, the educated minds need to engage with the political machinery of these countries and to get the establishment to accept that here we are in our own country where there is diversity and coexistence of many communities, and we are also very much part of the community here. We are Muslims, but we are also British. We are British, and we contribute to the well-being of the British society here. So that's the second one.
I didn't understand the question. What was the second question?
Do you agree that this is where the thrust of your efforts needs to be energetic?
Okay.
And the third thing is, I've got a tip on the stocks for you. Amazon went up by $50 on Friday, and it's going to go down this week, and this is real.
Okay, thank you.
The second one, please. Second question. Shall we can take it one by one? Three questions.
Okay.
Three. Yes, that's sister.
Sister in the back.
My question is regarding modernity and the nation states. These systems are put in place in a way that they fundamentally reject religion, or at least they try to curtail the power of religion under its own authority. So if we're constantly reacting to these forces rather than trying to change them or trying to assert our Islamic belief, identity, or ethics in a way that can dilute these systems, wouldn't that be a better way to approach rather than constantly reacting to the forces of modernity and working within the framework of the nation state?
Okay, very good question.
And the next one, please. The gentleman on the end, please.
You know, we need, as the Shaykh said, we need to be involved in the political process. And if the US government, sometimes when they take steps to, for instance, intervene in Syria or in Iraq or Afghanistan, then why are Muslims so hesitant to support their own governments in the West if the intentions of the West, are to intervene and stop these wars? I mean, for how long can we just keep helping human appeal to ameliorate some of the suffering rather than actually stop the suffering from happening in the first place?
Okay, so let's begin with the first question. So the brother said that if we continue down our path of jettisoning the tradition, we might form a split with the scholars of the East. I don't like the phrase jettisoning the tradition. I didn't use that phrase myself, and I am cautious to use it. In the end of the day, I actually self-identify as a liberal conservative, whatever that means. In that, generally, I guess I would be a part of the conservative framework, but I'm pushing for reformation from within. I'm on the more liberal side, because in the end of the day, I am a strong advocate of respecting the tradition. And I don't think, and if you look at the global world, the ummah, by and large, even if they don't practice Islam in a manner that they think is ideal, they believe ideal Islam is what the conservative Muslims believe. I.e., they might drink, but they think drinking is haram. They might not pray 5 times a day, but they think pray 5 times a day is something that should be done. The ideal that the ummah has, and I'm happy with that, is the ideal that is by and large within the conservative mainframe. And I believe that that is the way it should be. I'm asking for a reformation of a fine-tuning rather than a complete reconstruction from scratch. Because in the end of the day, we do have an established heritage and tradition. We just need to think about, and we get to this issue with the sister there, and I'll get to your question as well, functioning within the modern nation state and the paradigm of being a citizen of a liberal democracy and what we can fine-tune. I don't believe that any reconstruction of Islamic law will be successful. It's not going to happen, and I'm not even arguing for it. That's the first point. The second point about splitting with the ummah, you know, here's the point here. Islam has always been practiced by Muslims differently in different regions of the world. So how Islam is practiced in Indonesia is not the same as how Islam is practiced in Timbuktu, which is not the same as how Islam is practiced in Arabia, which is not, and on and on. So we need to understand, as British Muslims, as American Muslims, there's nothing wrong with fine-tuning our tradition to adapt to our social circumstances. A lot of people find the term British Islam just problematic, and indeed, there are certain aspects that might be problematic. Call it what you will, I don't care about names. Realities, there should and there will be a manifestation of Islam that is influenced by British culture and society, and there's nothing wrong with that, just like there's nothing wrong with how Islam is practiced in Timbuktu versus how it's practiced in Indonesia versus how it's practiced in Islamabad. It's as long as it is within the spectrum of Islamic law and permissibility. As for scholars of the East cutting us off, firstly, with all respect to them, it's not their right to cut us off. We are an ummah as defined by Allah, not by the Eastern scholars. And they're verbally saying they're cutting us off means nothing. In the end of the day, we are one ummah. And this is by the text of the Quran itself. And secondly, hopefully, there are many scholars in the East that are broad-minded enough and tolerant enough to understand that we will fine-tune our tradition to make it in accordance with our circumstance. The second issue of do you think the thrust should be political establishment and basically having a rapport with the law and politicians that makes us understand we have a space within the nation state? I think this is one thrust, and it is a very important thrust. And I think that some segments of the Muslim community should make this a priority. But there should also be other segments that make other priorities. And as I said in my last point, there is no one right answer. God created us, Allah created us differently. Some people like engineering, others like medicine, others like, I personally can't stand finance and economics. Never have, never will. My brain isn't wired that way. Similarly, in the Muslim spectrum, some people want to make this the priority. That's great, good for them. Others are more religiously inclined. They want to make Muslims praying 5 times a day, fasting Ramadan. Is that any less important? Some would say it's even more important. Good, let them be involved with that. Others are going to champion other causes. As long as those causes are within the spectrum of Islam, as I said in my last point, we should embrace this. So, to answer your question, yes, some segments of the Muslim activists should make this their priority, which is that the nation state should live up to its ideal, and that is to treat us like they treat every other minority, every other religion. They should not consider us to be suspicious merely because we disagree with their policies, right? They should not monitor us because we're vocal about the Iraq war. They should not think we're terrorists because we have beards and wear the hijab. Okay, so yes, but is that what everybody needs to do? No. Others need to do other things, and in that diversity, and that was my 5th point, that there is healthiness in this diversity. With regards to the sister's very profound question, my dear sister, I think your response and your question, it's a great question, but I guess I'm more of a pragmatist than an idealist, and I deal with status quo rather than how things ought to be. So I am talking about 50 million Muslims living right now under Western democracies. What do we do with them? Your question is great for a theoretical ummah. What should it do? But in the meantime, what do I do as an American who's nationally involved, who's well known in that part of the world, in the Western world? What do I do with my people who already are a part of the nation-state paradigm, who already are citizens? And I'm trying to solve current problems. And I think it is healthy that some people solve long-term problems. And I don't have frankly, I don't have an answer to your question. By the way, Wa'il Hallaq was a great Islamic academic, Islamicist as they call them these days. Orientalist is an antiquated term after Edward Said wrote his book. So an Islamicist, Edward Said is a modern Islamicist. He's written a very interesting book. It's called The Impossibility of the Islamic State. I encourage all of you, especially your question, you need to read that. Are you aware of the book? Are you aware of the book?
Yeah.
Okay, so have you read it yet? Or putting you on the spot? Okay. Wa'il Hallaq, and by the way, he's not a Muslim. I'm just saying that just to think he's not a Muslim, but he's defending a very interesting idea. His point is as follows. He says, the title gives it away, the impossibility of an Islamic state. Islamic states are impossible in modern times, not because Islam is unrealistic, but because the nation-state paradigm is an inherently flawed paradigm. That's his basic premise, that the nation-state really has a whole huge long list of liabilities, and the Muslim Ummah paradigm is actually more logical, more sensible to consider people to be a part of your society if they have the same values as you. If they have the same belief system, the same infrastructure, that actually makes sense. So according to him, you cannot superimpose these two paradigms, not because Islam is somehow backward, but rather because the nation state does not allow for a better system. And actually, as a non-Muslim, he says the Muslim system seems to actually be more logical. And he has some interesting points over there. But I cannot answer your question immediately, okay? You have a quick follow-up because we don't want to have a...
Well, I mean, I think from the way we see the world currently, both in the West and the East, the nation state in itself is not living, as you said, up to its ideal.
Very true.
And it's dissolving. And there are many identities that sort of try to supersede that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we as citizens should not just react to the existing ideology or the proclamation of the nation state. We as Muslims should say, yes, we believe certain things that are antithetical to the nation state.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I really love your bravery. I really admire your courage, and I have said the exact same sentiments in a number of lectures I've given on YouTube, and I am very clear about this. As Muslims, let me be very theological, let me just tell you as a sheikh or a religious guy, we as Muslims need to be very careful that we don't make the nation state into a false god. What do I mean by this? To consider the nation state to be sacrosanct, to consider the nation state to be beyond reproach, to start worshipping the idea of a nation state. Because that is the essence of totalitarianism, that is the essence of fascism. To take the nation state as a god, in the end of the day, there is no such thing as a nation state. It is the figment of our collective identity. Nations come and go, nations rise and fall, borders change all the time. And there is no such thing as the nation state other than the humans that are happening to be in government at that particular time. So we have to be very careful that we don't become partisans, we don't become jingoists, we call them in America. I don't know if you have that term over here. But basically, people that quite literally make the nation into a god and make loyalty to the nation into a religion. And that is what fascism is. That's what dictatorship is. We have to be very careful. And I've been very public in America, very explicit. I have said, as an American Muslim, I am proud to be an American. And I thank Allah for being an American. But let's make no mistake about it. If there were to be a clash between my American identity and my Islamic identity, if you as an American country were to force me to choose, there is not a question in my mind. My loyalty is to my Creator. And there is no question that I will give up any citizenship in a second if you force me, against your own principles, by the way, because it would be against your own principles. If you force me to make a choice, there is no choice between my God who created me and between an imaginary nation state that you are considering to be sacred and creating a mythology and giving veneration. No, I like the fact that I'm born in America. I thank Allah, honestly I do, but I thank Allah. Because Allah is the one who, and I thank Allah for my education, my upbringing. I am who I am because Allah chose me to go through a certain educational system. I thank Allah for that. But in the end of the day, my loyalty is to my Creator and not to any politician. You see? So you're absolutely right about that point. We have to be very clear. And the final question from my dear high school friend, that's a high school friend of mine back in the 80s, mashallah, and now he's doing a PhD at Oxford, mashallah. Nice to see you again. The third question is, honestly, it's a difficult question to answer because, being a bit cynical here, but Western intervention has always come with a price tag. And one needs to ask themselves, is that price tag worth it? Frankly. And I don't have an answer. Wallahi, I don't have an answer. But it is a question that needs to be asked. Wherever the West intervened, wherever, it always came with a moral, an economic, and a political price tag. And frankly, perhaps that price tag is not worth it. Perhaps the only long-term successful solution must come from within and cannot be superimposed from without. That is my gut instinct, but it is my opinion, and just because I am a sheikh and an alim doesn't make my opinion better than yours in these issues. It's a political opinion, and Allah knows best. But my gut instinct would be, I don't like Western intervention because they don't act from a selfless perspective. They all, and what would you expect of them? Of course they have vested interests, it's understood. So because of this, I'm hesitant. No one knows best.
Brother Bilal, can you say that? Please make it short because there is no time. We have many people.
My question is connected to this question. Is just I'm asking. By default, if we start following the secular parties and secular democracy, we end up in making this new concept of nationalism and false god, and that's happening in Pakistan. I'm from Pakistan, and even my own friends, my family, and they have become Pakistanis more first, and then a Muslim, right? So my question to you is, shouldn't we otherwise, like you said, we have to make an effort and we leave rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for reward, right? Why don't we, the British Muslims, make up their own parties, and a single party which try to implement, teach the people, local people about the concepts of Sharia, which is today being considered as an evil law. Teach them, because I have been in conversation with people and they do understand. Yeah. So my question is, or my statement is, we're working on making our efforts towards the right path that we know is.
So very interesting question. Oh, you mean that? Okay.
I think we take three again. Sister, please.
It's a similar comment that I wanted to make to the young brother over there. Thank you very much for the talk. There isn't a forum here, but there are many things that you have talked about and said, which I would like to discuss with you, because I don't really agree with them for many reasons. But I think the principle that's been highlighted here is you talk about tradition. And tradition really, as opposed to culture, but you never mention culture. And we're talking about a various number of cultures, but one deen. And we don't talk about how to bring the deen together, regardless of the cultures, which I see as tradition. And I think that really, in order to, should we not be thinking about empowering the young Muslims of today, who have been actually totally disempowered? Not totally, not all of them, I don't want to be generalizing as well, but they actually are not empowered by their faith at the moment. They're rather disempowered. And shouldn't the ulama actually be teaching in a way that that is enabled, and they are enabled to think for themselves, rather than be preached at to do this or that or the other? And I wonder, wouldn't it be a good thing, perhaps, and this is the nub of the question, if you believe that the ulama are coming out of all these schools, having been taught not the appropriate things for today's modern world, then shouldn't it be that some of our direction goes to within our own system, so that actually they are addressing the issues of today? And the issues of today aren't just political, they are emotional and psychological, and they are about soul.
Mm-hmm. Please, thank you. Please, can you make it just one question and a short which we can go around, please? Thank you. That's sister on the end. Yes.
Thank you for the lecture. I have two questions. They're interrelated. The first question: what is your idea, or how would you approach the way in which one interpretive authority and Muslims at large look at the roles of women within society, one within the normal everyday, but as well as their roles within the interpretive authorities that we have today? And then second, related to that, you mentioned that, for instance, the brother that came to you and asked you about the stocks, and you also asserted that it's a two-way street, both between the audience, the people who come to listen to the lectures, as well as the scholars. So my question is, one, the idea and the reference that is given to scholars didn't develop in a vacuum, and the way in which we approach scholars very much grew out of when we inherited a specific tradition and how we're supposed to engage with scholars. If it is a two-way street, what would you say to your contemporaries and colleagues about the way in which they engage with their constituents when they come to these, when they're asked these questions? What should they say to them? And then also, what would you recommend or say that the average Muslim should do in order to kind of break this this approach of going to scholars that are not qualified in that specific field in which they ask questions?
Okay, exactly. There's 3 questions. Is it? Okay. I'm going to take your question first because it's the freshest in my mind. I'm interested to see where the disagreement lies, but everything you said I agree with. So I hope you didn't get another impression. Of course I want to empower Muslims with their faith. Of course I want them to engage critically. That was the whole point, that they should be more questioning and don't consider their ulama to be final authorities, but neither dismiss them. Take them alongside specialists of the other traditions. So as for reforming madrasas, you are speaking to the right person. This is my ultimate life project. This is the goal that I have, is to form a seminary in the Western world that is meant to train the ulama from the West. Because in my humble reading of history, no Islamic civilization has ever flourished that imported its ulama. There has to come a time when the ulama come from within. We cannot keep on importing, sending our kids somewhere and then bringing them back. Because when they come back, they will bring back baggage. It's inevitable. Yes, it needs to be done for the first 20, 30, 40, 50 years, of course, because you need to form a critical mass. But there comes a point in time where there has to be an organic growth from within. And that is exactly what I want to do with my life. That my vision, really, my big project, is to have such a seminary somewhere in the West, most likely in America because I happen to be American, but somewhere in the West where we will train a new caliber, a new understanding. Not that we change tafsir, but that alongside tafsir, our students also need to understand what it means to be a modern preacher, a modern alim, a modern sheikh. How can you teach somebody just classical tafsir without telling him what is political activism, without teaching him pastoral care? Our mashayikh are also counselors. They need to be taught how to counsel the youth, how to deal with depression and alcohol and whatnot. This is a necessary part of being a future alim. They need to know modern Western thought. They need to know how democracy functions. If they don't know how democracy functions, then and only then can they say democracy is kufr, democracy is shirk. Because they don't know what it is. Once you understand it, then of course you will say, well, it has some good, it has some bad, you can utilize it for something. So different audiences. Our brother from Pakistan points out a very real problem. And this is one of the problems of nationalism that we need to be very clear about. That we have no problem. This is what Rashid Rida wrote 100 years ago in his Al-Manar. And this is exactly my opinion as well. That nationalism is a new concept. He's writing this in literally 1920 something, right? 100 years ago. Imam Iqbal says the same thing. That nationalism is a new concept. It has some positives. It can be used positively. But we have to be careful that we don't make this into another god, another religion. It has to be very careful. And unfortunately, as you correctly point out, in every country, in America we have the Tea Party folks, right? America this, America that. Well, what is America? It's your conception of America. My conception of America is other than your conception, right? And we have seen what happens with that type of rhetoric in 1940s Italy, in 1930s Germany, when the country becomes the religion. And to dare criticize the country becomes like blasphemy and a mortal sin, right? We have seen the fanaticism that develops. Unfortunately, as you know, history repeats itself. I am from a Pakistani heritage. My father's from Karachi. I'm from a Pakistani heritage. Of course, it pains me because yes, you have pointed out, especially in Pakistan, this is the dogmatic, the problem of not just different groups and firqas, but this notion of Pakistan being some type of sacred cow, literally, right? That cannot possibly be, touched. SubhanAllah, what is Pakistan before 1947? How long has any country lasted? How long has any country lasted? How long will Pakistan last? Allah knows, but it's not going to last forever. It's just a country. Respect it, be thankful you're there, try to work for its betterment, but don't take it as a god. So your question was basically, why don't we get involved in parties now that are religious in nature? Now I want to be very excellent. I should have made this disclaimer. I am not speaking to Muslim majority countries. I'm speaking to us as a minority. I'm speaking to Muslims in England who are 2-3%, Muslims in America that are less than 1%, right? I am not speaking to what Muslim party should do in Egypt or whatnot, because it goes back to my point, scholars should know what they're qualified to discuss. I'm not qualified to discuss Pakistan and what they should do, or Egypt or Timbuktu. I am a Western born and raised, I'm an American. I feel confident speaking about what we should do. And I think that it is really not feasible. It's not un-Islamic, but it's not realistic to have the Islamic party that wants to implement Sharia. I mean, we're less than 1%. Of that 1%, less than 5% would even be interested in joining such a party, if even that, right? So realistically, there's nothing illegal about it, by the way, and it should not be illegal. In America, we have Christian parties. In America, we have parties that are lobbying to change laws about homosexuality, laws about abortion, because the Bible says. That's their main reason. And there should be legal. Let them preach it. Let them get a vote. Let them. So as long as we're working within the system, I'm not saying it's illegal or un-Islamic to have such parties. Let them go and preach and see if the majority come. I'm just a pragmatist. I just don't think that there's much value in having a party that is saying we want to apply the Sharia in England. I mean, it's not going to happen in my humble opinion. And so I'm a pragmatist in this regard. Should there be people as da'is preaching what is the Sharia? You have a misunderstanding. You believe the Sharia to be just cutting off hands. No, the Sharia is about mercy. The Sharia is about how I respect my parents. The Sharia is about taking... So yes, I should be preaching this on the pulpit, on BBC, on ITV. I should be telling this to the... So this is education. But in terms of forming a party and whatnot, I'm skeptical, but it is permissible. If you want to go do it, then I will tolerate you within the 5th category. But go ahead and do it. And there's some good going to come out. And then there was a final question about the women in society and the lack of representation you were also talking about. Yeah, I mean, this is a sad reality. I wish I could change it. We need to have female scholars as we used to. We need to have female ulama because we do need feminine voices. There's no denying that I, as a man, am shaped by being a man. And my understanding of many things will be shaped by the fact that I am a male. And we do need feminine voices. So I am definitely an advocate of female teachers and ulama. And you know that I'm involved with the Maghrib Institute, which is viewed overall as being somewhat of a conservative institute. But we were of the first institute to hire a female ustada. And we hired her. I was actually the one behind it, pushing for her to be hired. Because I am a strong advocate that somebody who's qualified, somebody who has learned the tradition and has studied jurisprudence. Yes, we should also put her in the limelight. So you're preaching to the choir here. I definitely agree. We need this. What do we say to the other ulama who basically put themselves above their category? As I said, when I speak to audiences such as this one, I will somewhat be harsh with our problems. When I speak to my colleagues in the academic field, in the Islamic scholarship field, believe me, I'm also engaged with them. That they stop talking about things that are beyond their expertise. That they need to understand when they give a political opinion, a lot of times it is given far more credibility just because it comes from a shaykh. And frankly, political opinions from scholars are just as useful as mine and yours. That's his opinion. But because the people respect this scholar for his fiqh and they should respect him for his fiqh. That's what he's trained to do. So ask him questions about fiqh. Ask him questions about, classical theology. Ask him questions. But when you ask him about basically political programs, about modernity, realize his opinion is no better than yours or mine. Put it into perspective. They need to be told that. I can assure you, I am engaged in a lot of dialogues with my own contemporaries and peers, and inshallah, bit by bit, change is going to be slow and gradual, and inshallah, I do see some changes in the positive direction, and we hope Allah Azza wa Jalla blesses us with even more. It is up to you,
yes,
or the
we
audience.
get three more questions.
The final batch of questions. Final batch of questions. Where are you?
Right here.
There. Oh, no wonder I didn't see you. Looking everywhere here. You're over there. Okay.
It's related to what you said about individuals where you have a qualification or something, we have an informed statement about it.
Can you put it closer to your mouth?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So, obviously as Muslims we have the fundamental belief that the Quran is the literal word of God and that's a miracle, and that gives us guidance in our future lives. And at the same time, I'm often sort of told that obviously it doesn't need to have a deep and meaningful understanding of the Quran, and that they sort of appreciates the narrative and for them to draw ahkam, but often said has some degree of qualification on that. So therefore, how does a lay Muslim, or for that matter, even a non-Muslim, for example, there was that one, how can they sort of have that appreciation of the Quran without necessarily having some qualifications?
Without necessarily having
The
qualifications for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Okay, next one. That sister there, please. I apologize. Just my mind got somewhere else. Yes. Can you give the microphone? Yes.
There's a mic right there.
There. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What do you think is the biggest area of modern day Islamic reform that you think needs to be addressed to bridge the gap between the liberal and conservative thinkers of today?
And the next question is our brother there, please. Just can you pass the microphone?
I think, Shaykh, as I understand it, what you're effectively advocating is something like Islamic relativism, that you take Islam in whichever city or country you're in and apply it according to the circumstances you're in, which I'm all for. But how does one deal with what is increasingly becoming a problem in this part of the world, and that's Islamophobia, where you have that clash, I don't want to say clashes, but you have almost a cultural conflict where someone's been pushing towards and pushing against the Muslims that are living in Britain or in America. How does one overcome that in the current climate?
Okay, so the first question, how can a lay Muslim or even a non-Muslim appreciate the Quran without having the hermeneutical tools to extract laws from it and whatnot? As for the lay Muslim, so somebody who believes in the Quran, there is no doubt that it should be in the mind and the desire of everybody to at least increase their knowledge of Arabic even a little bit, because it is healthy, and even if it means just going over the surahs they know and looking at the translation. So they definitely should have some appreciation of the Arabic, and this can easily be done by relying upon tafsirs and exegesis that have been translated. Also by, alhamdulillah, there are a lot of speakers of my generation that are now presenting the Quran in modern English. I have a few tafsirs. I have Tafsir Surah Yusuf, Surah Fatiha, small tafsir. Nouman Ali Khan, as you are probably well aware, his speciality is basically presenting this. These are people that you should be listening to, because that's exactly what I'm talking about, new scholarship. They take the classical tradition. They're not coming forward with something bizarre and new, but they understand what is relevant, what is not. They can bring examples that we can relate to, and they simply present it in a manner that is more conducive. So as for lay Muslims, this is what they should be doing. As for non-Muslims, there is no doubt this is an issue, because translations of the Quran, as even all of us Muslims realize, are painfully inadequate. The Arabic is simply beyond translation, and that's a fundamental theological point for us as Muslims, that the Arabic of the Quran cannot be translated. Nonetheless, all that we can ask them to do is to derive whatever benefit they can from the meanings, from the content, from the ethics and theology, from the moralities, and as we all know, and I'm sure in this audience as well, people convert, or people are impressed, or people see the beauty of Islam simply by reading the translation. Maybe not to the level that they read the Arabic, but in lieu of the fact they're not reading Arabic, there is no alternative other than to rely on translation. I have to go on because people are, let me just finish up here. The brother, let me just go to your question, and the brother asked about Islamic relativism. You know, that is a dangerous term, because I'm not saying it's all relative. I'm saying to a degree it is relative. And that's what separates me from, I call the progressive strand of Islam. I'm not a progressive at the end of the day. As I said, I respect the Sharia, and that I respect our fuqaha's endeavors. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm asking for a fine-tuning and a re-evaluation. I'm not asking for a complete rehaul or reconstruction. Okay? So, yes, certain things are relative. There is an element of gray area here. And what I want to do is to encourage us Muslims to take our culture into account and understand that the Sharia allows for some relativity, not unconditional. Your issue of Islamophobia and how to deal with it, I think again, everybody in this room understands this is one of our main problems of modernity, that people have views of Islam that are incorrect or that are misunderstood, that sometimes what they're saying is true, but they're simply not looking at it in the proper context. So we need to be battling Islamophobia on multiple levels. We need to be battling it at the national level, in the media level, the political level. We need to be battling it on the individual level. What you do depends on who you are. If you are a person of influence, a person involved in whatever, you involved there. But for sure, all of us, without exception, need to be battling Islamophobia on the individual level. Your colleagues, your friends, your acquaintances, every one of them, you are Allah's ambassador to them. You are the Prophet Muhammad's representative to them. Realize that. That's a big responsibility. They will look at you and they will think of Sharia, Allah, His Messenger, Islam. If you are not good in your manners, if you are dishonest and cheating and lying, if you are having a bad image. So honestly, we have, of course, Islam tells us to be honest. I am saying, in modern times, that honesty is 10 times more important. Because you are their conduit to the faith. And what did our Prophet ﷺ say? I have only been sent to do what? To do what? To protect good manners, to perfect good manners, excuse me. I've only been sent to perfect good manners. His whole mission was good manners. So, you ask a really deep question. My answer is really simplistic. If every one of us were to embody what we view our Prophet ﷺ as, we will do an immense job in battling Islamophobia. You guys are, mashallah, tabarakallah, millions in this country. And I know this is only 2-3%. In London, you're what, 10%? Huh?
Yes.
It definitely looks like it's some places 90%, right?
It's a million.
Yeah. I mean, it's a million. I mean, subhanAllah, if every one of them even took a fraction of the beauty of Islam, think about it. Do you really think Islamophobia could actually exist in their minds? Wallahi, we know our Prophet for us is a prophet of mercy, prophet of love, prophet of compassion. For them, astaghfirullah, they view him, astaghfirullah, as violent terror. No Muslim in the world views his prophet like that. We failed in protecting his image. Isn't that the case? Those idiots who did what they did in France, wallahi, they have damaged the reputation of our Prophet far more than the cartoonists have done. Far more, 1,000,000 times more. The cartoonists could not have harmed his image, even a fraction, as much as those idiots did. We are the ones who damaged the image of our Prophet. So I'll be simplistic here because yes, there is an element of simplicity. Every one of us is required to demonstrate the reality of Islam. That is the best way to battle Islamophobia, and it is the most effective way. And Allah knows best. The final question we have, inshallah, the very final question, when the sisters asked the liberal and conservative gap, how do we bridge it? That is a very difficult question. But I think one of the ways is to find people on both sides that are open-minded enough to begin a dialogue. Because on both sides there will be narrow-minded bigots. I can assure you from my side, which is the ulama side, there are plenty who want nothing to do with that class. But there are also plenty who understand. And the same goes, and I'm very active in my North American community. I'm very active, and I have actually a friendly relationship with many of the progressives and liberals. People that I theologically disagree with, actually, right? But they have something to offer, and they realize I have something to offer. So you'll always find people of a middle ground, people of a moderate temperate. Those are the ones that we need to concentrate on. And I feel if we actually do something together, if we show the ummah, this is what so-and-so who represents this version, so-and-so represents that version, if we show the ummah the positives, inshallah ta'ala, the rest are going to follow. I'm an optimist, not just because our religion teaches us to be optimists, because in the end of the day, our religion tells us, always look at the bright side, always be an optimist. Not just because of that, but because I have seen in my own lifetime that politically the situation is grim. I'm not an optimist there, to be honest. But if you look at the ummah, if you look at the Muslim world, you clearly see overall a revival taking place. You clearly see more and more people. Yes, people are leaving, but also people are coming back. Very few are remaining neutral, right? Yes, it is true we have major issues, but we also have people that are interested, thirsty for Islam, thirsty for solutions, thirsty for knowledge. So, inshallah ta'ala, I'm optimistic that in the end, much good will come out. We might not see the fruits of our efforts in this world. We might not see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I am optimistic that much good will happen in our personal lives, and the most important, that our Lord will be pleased with us and bless us in this life and the next. And thank you all for inviting me to that.